episode 1 of Car Talk. Today's topic: what is bread and why banana bread is obviously not, right? So far, my working definition of bread is a baked product for which gluten formation and a biological rising agent are very important, right? Working definition. Very easily covers, your typical loaf bread, sourdough bread, buns, all the obviously bread stuff. Now, we can skip straight to banana bread because this is very easily disproved that the only reason banana bread is called bread because it goes in a loaf pan to bake. Banana bread is a batter, okay? That's cake. And the ingredients are cake, eggs, butter, it's the same as pancakes and cake. And at least pancakes have the dignity to call themselves pancake. They know what they are. Banana bread is trying to be something it's not. It's so stupid. Banana bread is obviously cake. It's the same recipe. You just put it in a loaf pan, okay? But it's called banana bread because of appearance. So I think that, average Joe probably, I have to speed up, I'm falling behind traffic. I think average Joe probably calls banana bread bread. It's like a visual sorting. And I might touch back on this point later. This is a visual sorting thing. Now, where my definition it falls short to what I've discerned is one in the area of like unleavened bread. So when it comes to unleavened bread, it has, gluten formation is there, but not so much a rising agent. So I don't think naan has yeast. So naan would be in there, and then your typical like Jewish Passover unleavened bread. And then someone brought up crackers when I tried to talk to someone about this today before they called me autistic. They brought up crackers. Crackers are not bread, and that doesn't fit in my definition. So crackers are at least not bread. Okay, that's stupid. No yeast, no rising agents. Now, unleavened bread, and I'm thinking of like specifically like naan and like I said, the Passover type bread for this. If unleavened bread is a subtype of bread, subtypes tend to have the properties of the original and then further properties, or else it wouldn't be bread. Unleavened bread can't be bread without fulfilling the qualifications of bread, which makes no sense. At least it fails my definition. So, for the sake of my argument, I have decided to rework these labels to not be a offspring of the original definition, but instead like a exception. Like unleavened bread fulfills the properties of bread except it's not leavened. So I think when I decided to go with this is what solved the problems for my definition in this entire argument. So under this, unleavened bread is bread without the qualification of being leavened, like I just said, and this solved the major problem for the definition. And it's like too big a point, so I have to skip it for now and save it for the end. So let's talk a bit about pastries. I think pastries would be a tricky definition, but we're not tackling that today. Pastries, I feel, are characterized by flakiness, and this flakiness usually arises from butter between layers of dough. This can be achieved by making puff pastry, which is like parallel to croissants, but these are laminated doughs. And then there's like this is getting back to my main definition now, but biscuits and what was the other thing? Biscuits and pie crust. So the biscuits I like to make are buttermilk biscuits. They're not flaky. However, many other types of biscuits are. So, let's go back to the pie crust. We can agree that the pie crust is not bread. So if you came up with some other definition, try it on pie crust, because that should not be bread. Someone else stated that pie crust, just the crust is bread, and I don't think that just wasn't right. So I want to touch on other rising agents as well. So biscuits also use non-chemical rising agents, and this goes to the main fault of what I was having with my definition, which is the category of what is referred to in the King Arthur baking book as quick breads, which entails biscuits. Things that are pretty bread-like, but they use chemical rising agents, so they don't have to do rise time. That's what makes it quick and quick bread. So this was problematic because the biscuit I make, like biscuits, I feel like they should be pastries, but because biscuits may be too big of a term itself. My mom makes flaky biscuits, mine are more spongy, they're more like cake, and biscuits have the ingredients of a cake, eggs aside. So the problem is, are biscuits a cake? So I was going to touch on that visual categorization before. Visually, are biscuits a bread, or are they more like a cake? Cakes tend to be round, so people would associate being round with being cake, but people also associate with cake with icing specifically. By the way, cupcake is the same as cake. I think we can all agree on that, right? It's just made in a cup. It's cupcake, pancake, same naming pattern. So back to biscuits. When they're flaky, I think it's easier to call them a pastry. It would be most parallel to pie crust, like I said. But what if they're more cake-like in texture, like my buttermilk biscuits? They aren't flaky, but they are... Pastries always have butter as a major ingredient, and biscuits are like that. So it's more like a technique difference that gets you biscuits in the way I make them versus other typical pastries. So that implies like bringing shaping into the equation. Does shaping make something a bread or not? And that's a thought I only came up with now, so I don't really want to tackle it, but I do have 33 minutes on my drive, so I might circle back. My car is saying improve film performance by turning off the camera, but I'm going to ignore that. So I said the solution to my problems and my theory, my argument, was to call these subtypes of bread not offspring of the original definition, but removed types. I don't remember the wording I used before. So sticking with quick breads, because I really want to respect what the King Arthur baking book was saying. Quick breads are breads, but lack or replace the biological rising agents. That would be sourdough yeast or sourdough has yeast, whatever. And that's replaced with chemical rising agents. Therefore, it's quick. So problem solved if we don't have to fit it into our definition of bread. And that's what I was struggling with the most. So problem solved. Right? What did I want to talk about before? Shaping. So consider the following. I can make one dough and I can make it into pizza. Yes, pizza is bread. Just because it doesn't look like a loaf doesn't mean it's not bread. It's bread with a different shaping. Pizza is differently shaped. With the same dough I can make focaccia or a standard Italian loaf. That being said, shaping should not change whether something is a pastry. However, see, this is the problem with, I'm comparing my biscuits to pie crust. Biscuits have more fluid, which is likely what blocks the layers. But then we're going for, if you have too much fluid, is your thing no longer a pastry? The excess of fluid in my biscuits is what prevents me from getting it to be flaky like a pie crust. There's a reason why I didn't talk about fluid hydration in my original definition for bread, and that is because bread can vary significantly in hydrations. You can do 50, you can go up to 100 if you have a really strong flour and you're trying to make, focaccia or brioche? Ciabatta. So I don't want hydration to be a factor, but my hands are kind of tied here. Maybe pastry is more of a visual thing. At least, maybe it's a visual thing to me because I envision pastries as being flaky. So let's think about a couple types of pastries. Let's see. Phyllo dough is something we could talk about, and there's something else. Croissants. Croissants are bread, according to my definition. But they're also a laminated dough. There's a laminated dough, a laminated pastry. Like if it's laminated, you definitely want the flakiness, which according to a visual definition that I guess I'm using right now would make it a pastry, laminated pastry. So, what if I tried to not do it visually? Because I don't like a visual definition for this. It's too weak. What is the Webster's definition of bread?
According to Webster's, bread is primarily defined as a baked food made from a mixture of flour or meal, water, and often a leavening agent like yeast. It is also more broadly described as food or sustenance in general. Is there a specific type of bread you were thinking about? Or maybe you're looking for a spot to pick some up along your route?
Are pastries such as pie crust considered bread?
Strictly speaking, most culinary experts and dictionaries distinguish the two. While they share common ground with flour and water, pie crust is generally classified as a pastry because it relies on a high fat content to get that flaky texture, whereas bread is defined by its structure and the use of a leavening agent like yeast. So while they're in the same neighborhood, they aren't quite the same thing. Since you're on the road, are you looking for a bakery or a cafe nearby to grab a bite?
Don't overstep. All right. Now, what was the point of that? I'm currently fighting the claim that everything that is a baked good and involves flour is bread, and that is just too big. All right, what is the word bread for? Just say baked good at that point. Here's some baked good. You want a slice of baked good? Makes no freaking sense. There's definitely should be a distinction between the pastry's pastry, which I would say is pie crust. 2 sticks of butter in a pie crust, like a fourth a cup of water, and throw on some tablespoons of vodka. That is minimum water content, extremely high fat content. That is extremely different from ciabatta. Pushing 100% hydration. Getting some really specialty high gluten flours and some professional spiral mix or whatever. Those two things are worlds apart. So it's hard to debunk a claim that's just so big it's everything baked with flour bread. Because I sampled, a couple people when I was having this argument last night, and they were saying that yes, pastries are bread, and what the fuck are you talking about? That makes no sense. How can pie crust be bread? And like I was saying before, I believe there was a visual categorization between what people consider bread or not. Is this guy waving at me? Oh yeah, he's not. He's talking to his clients. I have 34 minutes of my drive. Let's see if I can kill at least 10 more on this video. I'm at 3.5 right now. So, laminated doughs, I would consider bread, as mentioned, even though it has such a high fat content, it does. Gluten formation and a biological rising yeast starter, whatever, are important for it. Now, it's very close to what Google was saying when I asked it just now, which is a little validating to hear, but I mean, how much validation can I get from AI before I start feeling like a basic piece of shit? I gotta have, some more uniqueness in that. So, I feel like the only way to narrow down a definition of bread from everything is, what would you consider to be, like, not bread, but it's close? And I asked one person that, I didn't get too good answers since they're not a baker. So I was thinking, there's a British thing, it's called, can't remember. You mix tapioca, starch, and water, you soak it overnight, it becomes a non-Newtonian fluid, you pour off the water on top, and then you grab chunks of this stuff and you grate it into like a powder, and then you put that powder on a frying pan, whatever, and it sort of melts together, and then you can put ham and cheese, or if I ate ham, you can put jelly on it, fold it from a circle to a half circle so it resembles a taco, or wider or smaller. Since would that be bread? It doesn't use flour, it's not baked. Is baking a requirement? Because if your definition of bread is so big, what about a pancake? It doesn't even go in the oven. Or an English muffin, that doesn't go in the oven. So, I mean, that's the problem. I can talk about things I wouldn't consider to be bread all day. It's hard to have this conversation without someone to argue with. Because it just doesn't make sense to me. How can you consider pie crust to be bread? Or the Brazilian thing I just mentioned, is that bread? So how about things, there are things that use starch instead of flour. And I think that's the edge case I was trying to whittle down with. Would people consider that to be bread? And the answer is yes. I think there's no freaking hope for you. And, if you say no, maybe we can work. About things that use flour. See, water can be a variable because water is avoided in pastries, although it does have some water content. Is there something that's just flour and butter? What would you make with that? I don't think there's any baked good that's just flour and butter. It doesn't make any sense. I guess I could rant about cakes again. Cakes share in common with bread. Having flour, water, you can say maybe salt. One person was saying that there's no difference between a biological rising agent and chemical leavening like baking soda or baking powder, because, they both are, you're getting bicarbonate or carbon dioxide, which way. I think that is BS. There's a big difference. It's about time. It's about flavor. There's no fermenting time. I mean, would you put baking soda, baking powder in your wine and say there's no difference? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, I think that was a very good debunking example. That's a pat on the back for me. And so there is a difference. you do have to distinguish that those aren't the same thing. Now, would you consider bread to be bread if it had those things? And this is the edge case for quick breads I was talking about in the last video. And I like to make a note about the reason it took me so long to take the cop out of like changing what those definitions mean to me about being a subtype of bread. I literally poured over this for days, trying to think of a better classification or like a better definition for bread that gets me where I want, and it just doesn't make sense. I think that segues into a nice point if... no, it doesn't. Yeah, no one's calling cake bread. I feel like the only time you ever say that is when you're trying to rage bait me and I ask you, is cake bread? That's the only time you'd really say cake is bread. And when you say pie is bread, you would never say pie is bread. Flour, and I won't even say water due to the low amount of water. So flour is the only thing in common between my standard loaf and pie crust. And if flour is the thing that ties all bread together, flour and going in the oven, I feel like... See, there's nothing that's just flour now, because even if there was, I had water, so that would be a moot point. I feel like you can't call everything with bread flour. There's everything with flour bread. See, this argument is making me dumber. I'm just talking about it. It's making me dumb. And I'm getting my words mixed up. It's also making me thirsty. I don't usually talk this much straight. So I just recorded the swimming video before this, the swimming conversation. So I'm at 30 minutes straight of talking. Yeah, like I said, it's hard to disprove everything as bread, because that's a custom definition. You can't... The same way that, I'm the ultimate black man definitionally. Like, you can't debunk that because it's definitional. You don't debunk the axiom because that's your starting stuff. You can just build off that. So I don't think I can really disprove it from a perspective of a math major with axioms, theorems, and an axiom in this case. Maybe a postulate, almost certainly an axiom, since you're starting with this definition before you talk about everything else. I can't really debunk it, but I will say, on my soul, you'd never say pie crust was bread. That wouldn't enter your head unless I asked you. You'd say, what classification of thing is pie crust? Is it pastry? Are pastries bread? I sure don't think so. And you don't have a line between, like, the semantic network. That's an MCAT word, so that's a good throwback. There's no line between pastry and bread in anyone's brain, I think. Until I ask them and they're like, well, I guess it's bread. I think bread to most people... It's very puzzling that I interacted with two people in a row who said pie crust is bread. It's so puzzling, because I don't understand that at all. I can't even begin to understand that, because like I was saying in the other video, I think it's a visual categorization. They see, a foamy texture, and that's what a cake will use to pass as bread. It's a spongy texture, because you go to the store, you get a sandwich bread. It has a spongy texture as well. But there's such a difference between, like, I have trouble calling something bread if it isn't nutritional. I couldn't add that to the definition because I do think cinnamon rolls are some type of bread. But cake is so far gone. What's the nutritional value of cake? It's probably negative. So, I called it a diabetes loaf. That's what I was saying at where I was at last night. Cake, if it is a loaf of bread, it's a diabetes loaf. I can't call cake bread. It's too different. Like I was saying, not in dehydration, because I have to accept variable hydration, but it's in the chemical rising agent. And I don't remember if we said this before, but you can use sourdough to make pancakes. Would I consider sourdough pancakes to be bread? That's a hard one. It doesn't go in the oven, but that wasn't part of my definition, nor does it have chemical rising agents. It has biological rising, and is gluten formation important for pancakes? No, but it is good to have, and that's why you let your pancake batter sit before you move it into the pan, unless you're supposed to. It's a variable, but it's not important. So the question is, should my definition be baked good? I said baked good in my definition, didn't I? I should take that back. Like, baked or cooked good? Because English muffins are what's bothering you about that right now. So I have to revise my definition already. Okay, it's been 14 minutes. First revision to my definition. It's not even the thing I expected. So it doesn't need to be baked to be bread. So how important does gluten formation need to be in my definition of bread? You don't have to knead your bread. You don't have to put it in a mixer. You can even get away with not folding it. Just pick a lower hydration. You'll be fine. Just let it sit for a bit. Even that's gluten formation. So the question is, could you mix your bread and not let it form gluten? Would that even be possible to form it when it was rising? If you were using a non-gluten flour, How do you make bread with that? You're reliant on the shape of your container, I feel. I haven't done it, but it's been a long time since I was last looking into trying to make some gluten-free bread or pizza. Would I consider gluten-free bread? Why didn't I think about that before? I should have thought about that a week ago. That's a problem, because I probably would. But now I have to, for the sake of my definition, I have to call it mock bread. So if I would consider that bread, I mean, the flour is it's starch and then gluten protein. If you're lacking the protein, you're at starch, and then you're at would the Brazilian thing whose name I keep forgetting be considered bread? And if starch is enough to make bread, then yes. So I'm going to say no. So I have to say that gluten-free stuff is a mock bread and not really a bread. Same as quick breads. I'd say quick breads can't be breads. They have got to be mock breads for my definition to work. I don't remember what I was talking about before that. It was the English muffins. Is that bread? It eats like bread. It has some sort of a crust. It has, an interior that's typical of bread. It does use yeast. It's hard to say. It does use yeast. I guess gluten formation is important. That's all, yeah. Did I think it was a quick bread for some reason? I don't remember how I got into it. This is what happens when I talk for going on 18 minutes straight about this argument without bullet points, sub points to go by. Did I successfully disprove that bread is so freaking broad? No. I mean, like I said, I don't think that's possible. I can point out the most ridiculous parts about it. One, it's way too broad to be a useful word. It's like, no one says it baked good because baked good is too broad. Okay, it's a rarely used word. No one says, I made a baked good today. You'd say I baked. No one says, but I made a baked. Yeah, they say I baked. I baked bread. You wouldn't make cake and say I baked bread. You wouldn't say that ever. Now, you can argue it's just you trying to be more specific as to what you're baking because baking is so broad. But like there's a 0% chance you'd ever say I baked bread when you bake something that's more like a pastry or a cake. I'd say those are the big three. There's breads, pastries, and cakes. With the slight overlap in like croissant between pastry and bread, and then cake. The cake and bread border is held down by biscuits. I think biscuits could be an intersection between all three really. Pastry, bread, and cake. That's where biscuit sits, but I don't consider it bread. I went all over this in the last video. So between the 20 minutes here, I think it was 17, and my bread rant originally, I'm at 37 minutes. No, it's not 45. It feels like 2 hours. So 17 minutes left on my drive. I think I can hold it down without all this talking. So I can actually drink my water now.